Hi, welcome. We're going to wait about 2 minutes just to let a couple more people log in before we get started.
It's not beer.
Okay, I think we are ready to get started. This is Andy Bigg's Storytelling and Composition webinar, and my name is Michelle Matthews with Digital Transitions. Andy is going to be presenting today. Arnav and Kate will be answering questions. You can type it down there. They will be answering immediate questions right away, and then the rest of the questions will be kept to Q&A, which will be at the end. It will be about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. Digital Transitions is divided into 4 different divisions. We have DT Commercial Photo, which we specialize in medium format hardware solutions for photographers. And then we have the Culture and Heritage Division, which sells digitization hardware for museums and libraries. We have Pixel Acuity, which is a digitization service for photographers, large companies, and institutions to archive stuff for them. And then we have the Scientific Division as well, which pursues research and applications with other systems. Now I'm honored to present Andy, which is a wildlife and landscape photographer whose images celebrate African landscape, and he will be speaking about his approach to storytelling and composition today. So take it away.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm going to do a quick intro, if you don't mind. Let's see here. Okay, great. So today I'm going to go over basically my idea of storytelling, composition, and design of photography. You know, photography is it's a visual medium for storytelling. So I'm going to kind of throw some ideas out that has my signature on that a little bit, and it'll be a very informal discussion. We'll look at some photographs and just talk about them. How about composition, light, color, lighting angles, and just kind of dive in a little bit. It's very high level. It's not very technical at all. And then at the very end, we'll do some questions and answers. I'm a wildlife photographer primarily, but I also shoot landscape and other aspects of nature. I have an accounting background. I was in the corporate consulting world for many years, and about 20 years ago, I finally said, I'm done, and it's time to do something different in life that was creative. So I've been an African wildlife photographer since 2002. I guide photographic safaris for a living. And I also license my photographs to companies and sell prints to individuals and companies. If you need to reach me for any reason, just send me a quick email. I'm around. You know, these days we're not doing a lot of traveling, So you can email me at hello@andybiggs.com and we'll kick off a quick conversation, okay? So I'm easy to reach. This is my office. My office is a mobile office. It has 4 wheels, and I go out into nature and I take photographs. As a nature photographer, I do have to take what's given to me and I have to make the best of it, which is often a challenge. But this is my office. My office is not where I'm sitting right now. This is just where I do the administrative work. This is where I send emails, process photographs, but this is not where I want to be. My preference is that I am out in nature taking photographs and also teaching photography. A few years ago, I did some work for Banana Republic clothing stores where they licensed my photographs and used a few dozen of my images in all of their stores and all of their marketing material to celebrate their 25th anniversary of being in business, or it was 30th year, I can't remember. But it was their urban safari campaign. And this campaign was to remind people of their heritage of coming from basically a company that outfitted people with clothing and material to go outdoors. And here's a photograph from a Paris store. You can notice some of my photographs on the walls in the background. It was a great collaboration for me where I was able to exist in the fashion world, but as a wildlife photographer. And it was a little bit challenging. It was totally new for me, but it was a wonderful experience. So we're going to kind of jump into the presentation, and we're going to go through some photographs faster than others, but the concepts are very important. And I like to start it off by saying that photography, when you compose a photograph, think about your subjects as being similar to actors or actresses on a stage. It's your job as the photographer to assemble those subjects in a way that makes sense, that helps illustrate the story you're trying to tell. If there is an actor on the stage or a subject that you don't want in the scene, it shouldn't be there. And it's your job to exclude them. So we use, as nature photographers, we use lenses to include or exclude what we want in the scene. We're exactly opposite of a painter. You know, painters have a canvas and they add things to the canvas as they wish. But as nature photographers, we're given what's there, and we have to use different lenses, focal lengths, to exclude. So it's an exclusionary process. It's a process of reduction versus an additive process. So in my unique way of doing this is that I use adjectives to tell my story. I assume that people don't see written words that go along with my photographs, the narrative. They don't have that. So they have to assemble what's going on just by using their eyes and their vision to tell what's going on. So for me, it's not important what I'm shooting. It could be a lion, it could be an elephant, it could be a tree. It doesn't matter. As long as I'm effectively telling people using adjectives. For example, over the years, now almost 20 years of doing this professionally, I have developed a way of trying to make all of my photographs conform to a handful of adjectives. I would like for them to be timeless, remote, hopeful, uplifting, regal photographs, which means non-aggressive, which means more positive leaning than negative leaning, non-aggressive. And so those adjectives guide me through my process of taking photographs and when to take the shot and which ones to process later. So I use adjectives. And the way I like to explain this is that I have to sell you, the viewer of a photograph, I have to sell you a concept. And for a lot of people, they might look at this photograph and think, wow, we've got 2 giraffes that are nurturing each other. Okay, and they're basically, it's a nurturing event between 2 individuals. But it's not true. These are actually 2 sparring bulls that are fighting with each other. It's just that I chose to take the image at a very specific moment that showed you something. So I'm selling you an idea that's not necessarily true. So I have to be in sales, and I'm trying to use these adjectives to help tell that story. So I'll make the argument that as we capture our photographs and we start processing them, and let's say we attribute adjectives to them, that the more adjectives that we can attribute to a photograph, the more compelling it is visually, the more interesting it is, and the more successful it is. Okay? So I love for my images to get to the point where I could use 10 or 20 words, single words, to describe them. And that's the way I'm choosing to shoot. And it doesn't matter, again, what I'm shooting. It could be any subject. It doesn't matter. So I go out into nature and I find what works, not what I'm trying to force into the situation. Okay? Now, when composing a photograph, now we're going to kind of move into a compositional area here. When I'm composing a photograph, everything that exists within that scene that I'm choosing to include, I want it to be there intentionally because I want it there. And if I don't want it there, then maybe I shouldn't take the photograph. But I like to use a series of either positive, neutral, or negative attributes to describe all of the different elements in the scene. And the more negatives I have, maybe it's not a great photograph to begin with. I want a lot of positives, some neutrals, and no negatives if possible. A negative might be something like a tree branch coming into the scene that has no resolution to it. Or it may be conflicting lines, or maybe just very awkward tone combinations. So I try to make sure I don't have a lot of those. So nature photography, for me, is often a process of, it's a reduction process, but it's also a process of simplification. I'm quite soft to the idea of like Japanese aesthetics, very simple, very purposeful, and I enjoy that. This is a little chaotic of a photograph for me, even though I like it, but I just waited a few minutes and I ended up something with a little more order to it. So again, it's sometimes in nature photography, it's about just waiting, take the shot that exhibits all those adjectives that you want, and then go out and do it all over again. So there is a little bit of a number game with nature photography. So shooting 1 or 2 subjects is often different than 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. So the more subjects you have, often you have more adjectives. And the reason why is because there is an implied relationship between 2 subjects in a scene. It might be a mating pair. It might be a parent-child relationship. It might be a sibling relationship. Whatever it is that you're trying to exhibit, there's going to be more adjectives to describe those relationships versus 1 subject, 2, you get more. And that's a good thing because remember, I'm trying to collect all these adjectives and I want the biggest list possible. And that's a good thing for me. And here's a photograph of 2 playing elephants in Botswana from a number of years ago. I think this was 2012. Where we get that interaction between 2 siblings and they're just playing and having so much fun. And that just gives me a huge list of adjectives. A lot of fun, and a lot of tears that day too. We watched them for probably 45 minutes. And here's a mother and a cheetah and her baby. Again, we get that relationship, and the relationship is really important. Here we have, this is a very unusual scene to begin with. This is an African wild dog. African wild dogs are the most efficient predators in the mammal world in Africa. But what's more unique than an African wild dog swimming across the body of water? Well, 2, of course, right? So we get more adjectives. And it also helps when you've got ears up and you've got eyes that are nice and sharp, or the eyes are open. Those are really good. More than 1 species. So this is kind of my trick. Like, how do I make a scene a little more interesting than just 1 or 2 subjects that are the same species? Well, let's try to combine 2 different species. And sometimes, like here, we've got a rhino and we've got a fork-tailed drongo. there's an implied relationship and tension between multiple species that exists differently than if you had two of the same species. Here we've got oxpeckers on the back of a Cape buffalo. It's a symbiotic relationship. Same kind of scene, but just taken from a different angle. And then we get into the theory of odd numbers. So as nature photographers, we are often we're often enamored by the scene in front of us, but we don't look at the numbers. There's a lot of science to say that there are it's visually more compelling and a little bit more tension when you've got 3, 5, 7, 9 subjects versus 2, 4, 6, 8. But 2 tends to be the exception. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9 is often more preferable to 4, 6, 8, or 10. So I'm often just looking for those odd numbers because I want tension. But eyes is our connection to our subjects. And this is so easy because all we need to do is just look for the eyes. Are they open? Are they in focus? That's really all we need to work on. And it doesn't mean we need to fill the frame with eyes, but my game is if I've got 2 subjects, I'm looking for 4 eyes. If I've got 3 subjects, I'm looking for 6 eyes. And the closer to 6 I get, the more successful I think the photograph is going to be. You know, photographs where all their eyes are closed or looking the opposite way is just, it's a way that communicates to the viewer that maybe there's not anything interesting going on in the scene when I took the photograph. So looking for wide open eyes. Here we've got 2 little cubs in South Africa looking at the lens. That helps, having all 4 eyes sharp and focus. This shot was taken a long time ago. I think this was 16 or 17 years ago in the Serengeti. And here we've got 5 lion cubs and all of their eyes are looking down just underneath where my lens was taken, where the mother was sitting. Or how about this? We've got some zebras in Botswana. They're all looking this way. Well, they all look this way because one of us jumped out of the car to just get their attention, and we took a photograph, and then we went on our merry way. It's a little trick. Yeah, I know. Or how about 4 lionesses, all with their ears forward, all looking towards the lens? So it's all about the eyes, that connection. Remember, eyes, tips. So let's jump into an area that I'm probably really most passionate about. It has to do with types of light. There are some lights that aren't that great to shoot in, and there are others that are definitely preferable. And I'll talk about the differences. So this one right here, this is one of my favorite. This is where the sun is coming towards the lens. You're probably getting some sort of lens flare, which is okay. But what helps is that we're getting the light coming through the tops of the grasses. The tops of the grasses are now lit up, and it's a very dramatic lighting style. This is the opposite, where the sun is now behind my shoulder. And it's a little more flat. And it's not that it's bad. It's very beautiful. It's just that now the tops of the grasses are not illuminated. It's very different. So we should understand and pay attention to these different types of lighting styles. So let's get into soft light. This photograph, excuse me, was taken off of the coast of Namibia, the Skeleton Coast. And this was a nice soft light coming through the morning coastal fog that was rolling in, and we were flying our airplane over the ocean, which had no fog, which is quite unusual, but we get this beautiful soft light. Usually in soft light, we get really beautiful colors. Okay, we don't get shapes as much, and the only reason I have some shapes on the edge of these sand dunes is because there was some direction to the soft light. Here's another soft light taken over the Okavango Delta in Botswana. I've got 4 subjects walking across the floodplains, and we're flying in a helicopter, just taking a photograph. So we get nice, beautiful, soft colors. And this was taken a few minutes later, a different herd of elephants walking through the tall grasses. Again, that beautiful yellow light. I love that. Here's another soft image from Tanzania, some flamingos taking off. Again, we're getting these nice, beautiful colors. Here's some red-billed quelea taking off to fly. Again, soft light. Now let's look at front lighting. Now, front lighting is often the most challenging for me. And the reason why is that as we get a light coming towards our subject, which is probably from behind the camera, the shadow from the subject falls behind them, and often we don't see the shadow. Shadows are important. The reason why shadows are important is because shadows help define edges, and edges define a shape. And photography is all about shape. And we're going to talk about that in a minute with black and white photography. But this is one of those dramatic front lighting situations that doesn't happen very often. We were watching this leopard, and all of a sudden, one little small piece of the cloud opened up and the sun came through for a few moments, took a photograph, and then it went away. The light did, not the leopard. So this is a front light situation. We're in a kayak, and the elephant is walking towards us, and the sun is behind me, and the shadows are falling behind the subject. And it's just very flat. The tops of the grasses are not illuminated. It's just flat, okay? Not my preferred angle of light. This is the opposite. This is where it's backlit and the sun is coming through. See how much more dramatic it is? Side lighting. Side lighting is great because you get both the edge of light and you also get shadows. You'll notice on the back of this meerkat, we've got a dark side and a bright side to him. And this is basically the sentinel who came out of the burrow first thing in the morning, and he's looking around looking for danger before all of the rest come out. This was taken down in South Georgia Island. We've got a bunch of king penguins going out into the ocean at about 2:30 in the morning. We've got that beautiful side light coming through the atmosphere, the wisp, the water in the air is now illuminated because of the sun. Dappled light. Now this is the one that drives me crazy. I would say I would pull my hair out, but I don't have any hair, so I can't do that. But dappled light is the one light that I do not enjoy at all because I rarely am successful with a photograph. Often we're shooting mountain gorillas or chimpanzees. Here's a tiger in India, and just got very, very lucky where the tiger walked a certain direction and she was illuminated by the sun coming through just right on the face. But often that's not the case. Often we get a dark subject with a bright background behind because maybe the edge of the forest or the edge of the dappled light is fully bright. It's really, really, really difficult. And this is my favorite light of them all, what we call three-quarter lighting. And three-quarter lighting is where the sun is coming into the lens at a 45-degree angle, where you get beautiful contrast and beautiful colors. The shadows are coming towards the camera. You'll notice in this photograph, we have the lioness is coming towards us, the tops of the ears and the grasses are illuminated, and we've got the shadow coming across the walking path. So shadows are good. Do not be afraid of shadows. Shadows are your friend because shadows create an edge on a subject, and that edge defines the shape. It basically separates the subject from the environment, from foreground and background. And that's ultimately what really makes it better. Here we've got a lioness and her cubs in the tall grass. We've got the light coming through at an angle, and it's very dramatic. We get these beautiful contrasts. We've got color, we've got shade, and this is what I am often looking for. Sometimes it doesn't work though, which is okay. Here's a leopard up in a tree. Again, sun coming through. We've got like one of these legs are illuminated on the bottom, just the edge light. That's the best. It's the best. And here's a spot in South Africa where we've got an elephant drinking water. And because the sun's coming across, now we've got the water illuminated. This is one of those ones where I wish she would have been yawning into the sun, not away from the sun. But this is the risk of using this kind of lighting, because now we have the sun coming in the wrong direction, but that's okay. I still like it. Here we've got a lion looking towards the sunset and that beautiful side lighting, 3/4 lighting right on his mane. I hope that I'm not moving too fast, but I'm trying to get a lot in within 45 minutes to an hour. And here was a shot just from a small point and shoot camera in the Galapagos Islands. The sun is coming through at a 45-degree angle. We've got our two subjects, this sea lion and her pup, both perfectly set up on the beach, separated from rocks and other tones. So they're easily made out, like with their shapes. And we get good color, good contrast, good shadows. And then we get to backlit and silhouettes. Now this is very dramatic. This is really great, but there's one thing you have to pay attention to. And this really doesn't matter whether you're a wildlife photographer or you're shooting people, but it's often most successful when your subjects are looking to the side. Basically a profile shot, not looking towards the camera or away, because the shapes are often working, the subjects are defined by a shape that's easiest when they're the profile to the sun. Here we've got some elephants playing in the evening sun last year, and we get that beautiful silhouette. There's just enough shadow detail so we can look in there without it being a pure silhouette, but it's still, I love that kind of a shot. Get good colors this way. And here we've got the shadows coming towards me. I'm in a helicopter, and I'm taking photographs of these running giraffe, and the shadows are coming towards the lens. And that, to me, makes a more dramatic photograph. Remember, we've been talking about shadows. Shadows define an edge, and that edge defines a shape. And this is so much more helpful than if we would have been on the opposite side and the sun was in the other direction. This helps illuminate and define what the shape is of each of these subjects. Here we've got a silhouette of some zebras walking in front of an acacia tree in the Serengeti. Again, silhouette. It's not entirely a successful photograph, mainly because I think a lot of the subjects have their head to the ground, and it's difficult to identify what their shapes are. So in a perfect world, I would have been a little bit lower, making the subjects raise higher on the horizon, and maybe ideally a little bit of light underneath their torso or their bellies to help define what those shapes were. But I'll take what I can get. I'm happy. Again, another silhouette. Sun isn't quite low enough to make it work perfectly, but still, the point is that we get our four subjects separated from their environment, mainly because the sun is behind them. This is a little more successful. Here we've got different species on top of a hill in the Serengeti, sun going down, traditional silhouette. This was taken last March in Botswana. Some giraffes walking towards the vehicle as the sun is behind them. I think I may be beating this a little bit too much, but atmosphere is illuminated when light is behind it. What I mean by that is if you have snow, sleet, hail, fog, any of these atmospheric elements, and if it's in the air and you put a light source behind it, it will actually show up. And this is an important tool as a wildlife photographer because it's another one of those things that adds more adjectives to the scene. And it's very important. So we've talked about adjectives, we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about basically I'm trying to sell you an idea or sell you on a concept. And if I were to ask people, what is this photograph, without telling them anything about it, they would say, oh, looks like you maybe were flying above the Serengeti with a morning mist. No, that's not true. This is actually a photograph from a hot air balloon of the Serengeti, which is true. But this was the light the sun illuminating the dust in the air from the vehicle that was chasing the hot air balloon, that when we landed, they could grab the ropes and make sure we didn't take off again. So this was an artificially created situation Not that I intended for that, but it was man-made. This is dust kicked up from a vehicle, not from a morning fog. Again, it's about selling you a story or a concept using words and adjectives. Here's a photograph of the other hot air balloon that was flying with us that day. Here's a leopard jumping across a river in the Masai Mara in Kenya. And there are parts that are blown out in this image, I know. The point is that water underneath the leopard was illuminated because the sun is behind her, as opposed to if the sun was on the opposite side. And we're spending a lot of time talking about light today, because remember that photography, by definition, photography, writing with light, that really is our craft. We are taking photographs of light. We're taking photographs of subjects that are illuminated by light, that are reflected back into our cameras. And so we have to be very, very mindful of how light can work for us and sometimes against us. And sometimes all you have to do is move to a different location to get a much more dramatic photograph. And it's up to you to pay attention to where this light is coming from. So here we've got a bunch of dust kicked up at a water hole in the Serengeti. Zebras and wildebeest are running through. And because we've got that sun in the behind, we have all of that dust is illuminated. And that's great. I love that sense of mystery, of that powerful moment. Here we've got, I'm in a kayak in a stream in Botswana, and I've got an elephant that didn't know we were coming up, and he turned around and flipped some water our direction. But the point is that the water is illuminated because the sun is behind him. Okay, that helps illuminate and showcase that element. Again, here's another situation. This bull elephant walked up to me, and this was shot with a Schneider 240 millimeter lens. And so he was getting fairly close, and he took a bunch of dust and threw it up, and it was all illuminated because why? Because the sun's behind him. Very powerful moment. This is the Masai Mara. A little bit, I think this one's out of place. So photographers, we need to pay attention to shapes. And if you take an art history course, you might have noticed that art historians like to talk about how different types of shapes, being ovals, squares, triangles, upside down triangles, or trees. And they use those shapes to describe a situation or a scene. Well, in nature photography, I'm trying to assemble a photograph using different shapes and making sure that they complement each other and don't overlap too much with each other where it makes them difficult to understand the concept. Okay, so we're using light, we're using shadows, we're using color to try to separate them. But often the shapes, you can't do much about them because they are what they are. You can move. So pay attention to shapes. And in black and white photography, shapes are basically one of our main building blocks because we don't have the language of color. We don't have the ability to pull subjects apart using different types of hues. We just don't have that. All we have are light and shapes. And as they converge and go apart, that's really what we have to work with. So you have to pay attention to shapes quite a bit. Here we've got a family of elephants walking in the Serengeti, and I think it works well because they're separated. They were walking and they're all separated, and I probably followed them for a few hours, but it took a while. The idea, though, is that the shapes, they're not overlapping ovals, overlapping. Here we've got a lion with wind in his mane, looking towards the rest of his pride, but he's by himself, and the shape of him is so it's idyllic. He looks very relaxed. His paws are crossed. It's about shape. We've got two lion cubs, subadult lion cubs, sitting on top of a hill with some soft clouds in the background. This was shot with a 240 lens with a 2x teleconverter, actually. And it works because we've got a nice soft background. It's not a converging situation of converging lines. iPhone photographs are great. This was taken in the Galapagos a few years ago, just taking photographs as I walked around. I didn't use a big camera on that trip, just looking for shapes. And so here we have a marine iguana, and all of the different digits are separate from each other, and it's very graphically simple because it's all about shape. How about this? It's all about the tail, the sinuous tail. But we're going back to color for a moment. Color can be used as composition. You can use it for your composition. And so often we're talking about contrast. Well, people, I think in their minds, they think contrast is the difference between white and black. Well, that's true. That's what we call a luminance-based contrast. But you can also talk about hue-based contrast, which would be the difference between colors that are opposite of each other on a color wheel. And as they get closer to each other on a wheel, we lose that sense of hue contrast. So a good example would be a yellow and a blue. They're opposite. They're not perfectly opposite, but they are far apart from each other. And so we can use those as tools. Well, hue contrast, we know through science experiments, it excites our brains. Basically, it teaches it shows us that the more hue contrast we have, the more we think that the two colors are actually saturated more than they really are. So it's a trick for people to use without having to rely on saturation-based tools, which has its own challenges when processing your photographs. Because you're often, if you're increasing saturation, you're increasing color cast at the same time. So here we've got two different hues. We've got a warm hue, and we've got a cool hue. We've got the water that's blue, and we've got the orangey yellow going on my subject. The point is that as a nature photographer, I'm often looking for these situations where I have contrasting hues. For example, taking photographs of flowers. Well, if I have a blue sky, I'm often looking for a flower that might have red petals and a yellow center. Contrasting hues. Use them for your benefit. There's a big difference between this photograph and the next one afterwards. We're missing a little bit of luminance contrast here because the sun has gone behind a cloud, but we do have a mixture of colors going on here. It's not contrasty from a luminance standpoint, but it is from a hue standpoint. We have warm colors and we have cool colors. But then the sun came out, and now we have more of the luminance contrast to go along with the hue contrast. The hue contrast didn't go away and it didn't change. It's just that now we had more of a more vibrant difference between the lights and the darks. I had more shadows. I also had a little bit better behavior because now we've got a nursing baby as well in the scene, which I like. Now, as we're starting to get towards the end of the presentation, we're going to kind of move back to shapes again. Converging lines is like one of those things that just makes my head explode sometimes. And it's something that I have to live with, and it's a challenge. And often it has to do with bisecting lines with the horizon and subjects. So just be mindful of this, because sometimes you can drive to a higher place and shoot down on a subject and you miss these, you alter the relationship of these lines. So here we have my Land Rover, we have some chairs set out and one balanite acacia tree. And it's very graphically simple and pure. But here we've got a situation where I've got just a mother and two younger giraffe, but they're bisected by the horizon. It's not an unsuccessful photograph. I'm just saying that we need to pay attention to where the lines are, because sometimes the lines can really interfere with how you interpret the shapes. Here we've got some more giraffes. They're separated by the trees. They're not overlapping, and that's what I'm trying to illustrate here, is that, you know, typically in the wildlife world, we have subjects that are eating. Well, giraffes eat leaves from trees and bushes, which means they're typically next to trees and bushes. And so the shapes look like this. And that's really a challenge. So here they're basically ruminating because they're ruminants. So they've already consumed their food, and now they're just sitting there regurgitating, chewing, and sitting it back down. So it's a great opportunity as a wildlife photographer to find them when they're just standing in the shade, separate from their food source. And here we have another acacia tree. I mean, I love these acacia trees in the Serengeti. They're wonderful. But again, it stands separate from all of the other items, and we don't have a lot of converging line problems with them. And then, this is the fun one. So we've been talking about composition and all these different items and how to tell stories and using adjectives, but movement is its own compositional element. And so if you add a sense of movement by slowing down your shutter speed, getting that sense of power, I just made a list go from here of adjectives to there. I increased my list of adjectives, and that's ultimately what I'm after. I'm trying to portray dynamic scenes in whatever way I can. I just want that longer list of adjectives. I want to get it somehow. And movement, nice blurred legs, sharp torso, it really, really, really helps me. Here I'm dragging the shutter. I took a photograph of a lilac-breasted roller with a flash. I stopped the movement, but I still had a little bit of blur with the movement of the wings. Again, that sense of movement, sense of power, more adjectives. This little guy, he was making me laugh that day. He was running, and his tail looks like a little corkscrew. Had a lot of fun there. Again, we've got some running zebras in the Serengeti, but what I appreciated about this scene is that I had a lot of different running subjects at different distances from the lens. So it was nice to be able to create some sort of sense of depth to the photograph as well as movement across. So really, really, really happy with this one. So thank you guys. Thank you so much. I think we're going to move into a moment where we can start talking about, do some questions and answers. How does that sound? Thank you. Again, I'll give you my email address. It's hello@andybiggs.com. And if you have any questions or concerns or whatever, if I can help in any way, please send me an email. So let's get into some questions. Does anybody have some questions?
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pop up some questions for you. So if you could hop back to the image of the nursing elephant, Ariel is asking, how recent was that photo? It looks so primeval. Good to see the elephants in Kilimanjaro.
This one. I took this image, I think in 2018. Yeah, really, very recent, very recent. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, you did a pretty good job explaining everything. It seems like there aren't too many questions. Ariel, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, says yes, thank you. Here we go. Now the questions are coming in. So Daniel asks, for the zebra running photo, did you drag the lens or hold it still? So
that's a great question. I always pan the lens at the same speed as my subject. I find that I have more successes that way. So I basically follow my subject. I use an autofocus on the same spot of my subject, and I just shoot. And I often change the shutter speed depending on the speed of my subject and the gait of the subject. So like zebras, being an equine-based subject, they have four legs that are basically the same length. So when they run, their torso is very stable and their back is stable. So it's easy to get a sharper photograph of a zebra at a slower shutter speed than it would be something like, let's say, a hyena So all Hyena members, of which there are 4, hyenas have longer front legs than hind legs. So they basically bounce when they run. And it creates a challenge when shooting a slow shutter speed. So it depends on the speed of the subject, what the subject is, but always I pan at the same speed as the subject.
Excellent.
Hope that helps.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel.
And like I said, now we have all the questions flooding in, so this is great. David asks, are you usually in the car when shooting these animals?
Yeah. And it's not because I always feel in danger, because I don't. It's because my subjects are more likely to leave if I get out of the vehicle. And that's not great for a photographer, right? Because my subject is gone, or it may not be gone, but it's probably already on its way emotionally to leave, which means its hind is turned towards me. And that's not that visually interesting. But there are some exceptions. Sometimes I am in a hide. Sometimes I'm out of the vehicle lying on the ground, but letting the vehicle hide my presence. And in the Kilimanjaro area of Kenya, I do this quite often, where I get out of the car and I shoot up on my subject, allowing me to basically, we're back to the adjective approach. I want my photographs or my subjects to be heroic. I like them to be positive and very, uplifting. And if I can get lower than them and I can make them appear larger, that gives me my goal. But I'm not out of the vehicle that often. I'm not.
You did show us a couple of images that were shot from helicopters or balloons. How often do you do that?
Yeah. Well, it's expensive, so it's not often as I would like, but often because I fly with them, or I have customers that fly with them a lot, I get free rides. So it's whenever those invitations are extended to me that I will say yes. So I probably on average fly 2 to 4 hours per year in a helicopter, and probably 3 to 4 hot air balloon flights per year, which sounds like a lot, right? But given that I'm in the bush 18, 20, 25 weeks out of the year, it's not too much. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And so now we have sort of a bunch of questions that I'm going to group all together, asking about your kit and what equipment you use. And I think this one actually sums it up best, because you actually talked a little bit about using, even your iPhone and all kinds of different animals. So obviously, we're here because we are phase 1 dealers, and we really are happy that you're using that equipment. But it is tough to shoot moving wildlife with that 240 millimeter lens. And so Craig is saying he does that as well. But what ratio, if you're shooting, is on your phase 1 versus maybe a DSLR or on another camera or something like that?
That's a great question. So when it comes to landscapes, it's 100% medium format. Whether or not I'm using my SLR phase 1 or I'm using an Alpha TC setup, but I am almost always using my phase 1 for landscape. Now, when it gets to wildlife, I would say I probably shoot 80% with an SLR, like a 35 millimeter Canon, and 20% with a phase 1. But what I find really interesting is when I start processing my photographs and I'm looking for ones that I will make prints of or show people, my ratio is probably closer to 50-50, what I shoot with a Canon versus what I shoot with a phase 1. The phase 1 doesn't lend itself to every situation, obviously. The longest lens is 240. Autofocus is not going to be as fast, and just other considerations. But that's when I have an opportunity to basically plan out photographs and make sure that I'm taking whatever kit works for that the best. But when I look at the images at the very end of the year and I think, oh, how many did I shoot that I really loved? That 20% that I shoot with my phase 1 suddenly becomes half of my favored photographs. Yeah. So Hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. That's a perfect answer. Now, this is another really good question that I also had myself. Justin was asking, what makes you choose a black and white edit? How do you choose which images you shoot in color and which ones you either convert or shoot on like a black and white camera?
That's a really good question. I'll first start by saying that I prefer black and white photographs over color ones, mainly because I believe it gives me more flexibility as a creative person to dodge and burn and do things before someone says, oh, you did too much, or it's not a believable photograph anymore. And if I did that in the color world, I think I would cross that boundary way too often. So I prefer black and white photographs. And what makes a black and white photograph, and we talked about this, is the sense of shapes. All right. So having, I think, shapes that make sense, they can be overlapping and crazy and everything else, which is fine. It's just that I think you have to pay attention to shape. Shape drives everything in black and white photography. So I pay attention to that more than anything else. Hope that helps.
That's great. Now we have some great questions here. So Ariel is asking me again, Andy, are there any photos you wish you had taken but just missed? I was on a walk in a local Stream Valley Park and saw 3 large owls, but didn't bring my phone.
Yeah, that happens all of the time for me. And it's something I have to live with. And the reason why it happens a lot is because I earn my living primarily by teaching photography and taking people on photographic safaris. So my job is to be there as a resource for them, not for me. So a lot of the times I will be working with somebody to get a certain shot of a scene and my camera is sitting down. I'm not taking a photograph. So this happens so often. And for me, it's a little bit of fun. I mean, it's as a type A personality, it's difficult to lose at something. But at the same time, I have this internal solace because I know I'm coming back, right? And so I think that's what makes it easier for me, but it happens all of the time. Yeah, and that's a tough one. I drive around town without a camera in my car, but I still have my phone, my iPhone. But again, iPhone can't do everything for you. It happens. It happens more often than I wish.
Said, is there, are there times when you go out just by yourself without, clients and just kind of do your own personal shooting, or not so much?
Not often. Given the high cost of going on safari, it's difficult for me to just stay on safari for a long period of time after my guests have left, because it's time for me to come home. And so it doesn't happen often enough. The places where it does happen would be more likely in places in North America where I can drive and go take landscape photographs, like in the Moab area or Colorado. That's much more likely.
So here's another great question from Steven. It sounds like you spend a lot of time in the bush, but what time of year do you like to photograph? And if you're there all year, what are your favorite times?
Yeah, good question, Stephen. I like to photograph when I get the most dramatic situations. And often that means when the lighting is dramatic, and the lighting is dramatic when you have weather coming in, whether it's a winter storm or a rainstorm or something that is dramatic, which requires clouds. And clouds usually in Africa usually involve heat. So I just want dramatic light. There are no times that I explicitly run away from or ignore. If you were to look at like a tourism guide for different countries and when to go on safari, you would probably read things that said, you go during this time, you avoid the rainy season, and you go back during this time. I don't agree with those. I don't agree with them at all, because sometimes they don't line up with our goals. And being there in the rainy season is, I think, equally as justifiable as going during the dry season. So I like kind of all, I could make an argument for almost going on safari every month of the year in every location. There's no time I will run away from and say, not for me. Because remember, time in the bush is better than time sitting behind a or in front of a computer screen at home. So hope that helps.
Yeah,
Stephen.
I think especially now people are itching to get out from in front of their computers.
Oh, you have no idea. Yeah, I'm planning a safari for late November into early December this year, and people are contacting me saying, I just want to get out of here. I want to go to the bush. And from a COVID standpoint, I can make an argument that it's a lot safer to be out in the bush than it is in a big city.
And if folks are looking to potentially go on safari, with you or go on trips with you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I part of my business is that I arrange custom safaris for people, that I set it up with their budget in mind and time of the year and their goals. And I have people on the ground that will guide them for them. Some being traditional guides and some being additional services like someone to teach photography. And then I also have pre-scheduled safari groups that we go. And that's probably the other half of my business. I guide some of them, and I've got 2 or 3 other people that guide the others. And so we have scheduled safaris that might have a group of up to 6 or 7 or 8 people on them. And that's a way to go. So it's either a custom safari set up for your needs whenever you want to go, or a pre-scheduled trip that's on my website. My website is andybiggs.com.
Time, if folks want to take a look at that.
Thank you.
We do have a couple more questions, and your presentation went by relatively quickly, so I think the Q&A is going great here. So Bindi is asking, do you shoot in video to capture the best frame as the action is unfolding? Do you ever shoot video, or is it?
That's a great question. The answer is I do shoot video, but I shoot video for very specific purposes, and that's usually to illustrate to people who've never been on safari before, what does it feel like to be on safari? But I'm not shooting video with the intention of taking out a frame, and I'll tell you why. So with video, you are often shooting at twice the frame rate that you're shooting. Let's say we're shooting at 30 frames a second. That means that I'm shooting at 1/60th of a second with my shutter speed. Well, 1/60th is often too slow to capture what I want to capture. It's a little bit too blurry, okay? So it's difficult for me to grab a frame out of. I hope that helps. Yeah, it's not, to me, you either decide to shoot motion video or you decide to shoot stills, and they're so different from a storytelling standpoint that it's difficult to confuse or to get the same at the same time. You just can't do it. You have to dedicate your brain and your process to one or the other. Yeah, it's difficult for me to shoot video, especially of wildlife, because I have other people in the vehicle, which makes the vehicle move a little bit. And so I need to be by myself, just shooting wildlife. But for my needs, video is more appropriate for showing people what it feels like to be on safari. What do the accommodations look like? What are the vehicles like? What does the environment feel like? What does the camp feel like? Just everything to try to illustrate what is a day in the life of going on safari like. And that, I think most people, they know that they're going to see wildlife. So it's less of a need for me to film wildlife in video, because I think they already know what they're going to see. Yeah,
so I'm
Thank you,
gonna navigate quickly through the images here because Carlos was asking, how did you get that wonderful contrast in the elephants running to the left? I believe. Let me see.
Elephants running to the left. I mean, I had some
maybe
walking
I think
to the
these
left.
ones. That's a very high contrast scene. I was almost wondering if that was infrared.
Yeah, it was infrared. It was. I took this in 2007, I think, and I had converted a Canon SLR camera to shoot infrared, and it was a short-lived experiment. I didn't enjoy it. I'll tell you why. The tonal range that you get when you capture with the one that I had converted, it only had a certain range of in the visible spectrum. It didn't process very cleanly. I had a lot of noise, and I had to do a lot of very complex contrast curves to get what I wanted. I find it a lot easier to shoot in color and use different filters and contrast curves on very specific colors. So I have more control. So I'm not open to doing infrared again. Yeah, I might do like an achromatic type of a setup where it shoots a wider range of frequencies in the black and white world, but I'm not sure that I'm going to do it to infrared or near infrared.
Good to know. And you know, if you ever want to go achromatic, we've got you covered there. So you know where to find us.
I know.
Yes,
it's like a drug.
Yes, but that actually segues really nicely into our next question. And I was wondering this myself too. So Joseph asks, how much do you post-process on your images?
Not much. No, I don't do that much. I don't like sitting at a computer, and I try to do most of my work out in the field. So by doing clean compositions, easy to boil down concepts of stories, and the processing should take care of itself. And I work hard at capturing in a way that makes it easier later, meaning I don't blow out pixels, I don't underexpose or grotesquely overexpose. I try to capture the most information within my black and white boundaries. And so I don't spend more than about 2 or 3 minutes on a photograph for most. Yeah, I'm very simple, actually. It's not that I don't know how to do it, but I feel like if I have to spend so much time working on a photograph, I've kind of already lost the whole purpose of the photograph. So not that much. I don't clone out things. I'll clone out dust spots, but I'm not going to clone out trees and things like that. Again, if I didn't get it, then I'll just go do it the next time. I go so often.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, it sounds like you spend a lot of time following the animals, and you're probably taking a good number of shots anyway. So
yeah, I mean, I have a library of over 330,000 photographs, I think, over the last 20 years, which actually isn't that many, right? But I have plenty of opportunities. But my biggest enjoyment in all of this is, I would say it's 2 parts. Number one, I love being out in nature. I just want to be there. And I love the slow safari. It's not the Ferrari safari where you're going really fast and you try to get shots and run to the next thing. No. Mm-mm. The art of the safari is very important to me, where I interpret and I bring people into my world and I slow life down a little bit. I may run my mouth real fast, but the reality is we're kind of moving life really slowly. And the second enjoyment I have is that I take photographs for me, for my enjoyment. If other people like the photographs, I am flattered. I think it's wonderful. There's nothing better than someone buying a large print of mine and putting it on their wall in their office at their home. And that is the most wonderful feeling you can imagine. But I don't photograph for other people. I photograph for myself. And that's a luxury, I know.
Huge difference. So I think we have one last question here, and then I'll let you kind of give a little last thoughts and wrap up. But I was kind of wondering this. I'm a big film nerd. You said you've got 20 years worth of images. So do you ever shoot on film, Andy? Okay.
No, I don't. I'm not a Luddite, but I don't enjoy the process of film. Given what I do and how many X-ray machines I have to go through, it's just not something that I enjoy. Okay. But I do things in my workflow that reminds me of when I shot film. For example, when I shoot, I'm out in the field, I go back to camp, I leave my camera bag sitting alone, and I go have a beer with the customers, or I take a nap, or I read a book. I do not download my photographs. I do not screw around with my computer. To me, that just takes me way out of the moment. I love being able to take photographs and not forget, but just feel like I have Christmas Day coming up when I get home. You know, when I get home and I download the cards, I'm like, yeah, I remember that shot. I really wanted to process that photograph. So I kind of take the best of the film world, which is take a shot and forget about it. And when the card fills up, just put another one in. I don't back up. I just go home with a card or 2 or 5 filled up with images. I don't take that many photographs anymore. And I rarely fill up a single 128 gig card ever. So yeah, so I kind of take the best of both worlds. I don't enjoy shooting film, processing it, scanning it. I just don't. For me, I love these large megapixel capture devices where I get all of that information in a clean file that I can work with. And that's what I really enjoy the most. But yeah, I'm gonna add some more to that though. I love silver prints. So, and as well as platinum palladium prints. I would love to make some digital negatives out of my digital files and then do contact silver prints or platinum palladium prints.
We got a guy. We got a guy for you, actually. And for anybody else that's interested in making platinum prints or silver gelatin prints, we have a few print partners that we work with. Some of them are more in the inkjet space, but we have this one guy who has worked with, people for over the past 50 years making platinum, palladium, silver gelatin, all kinds of prints. And I'll put you guys in touch. And if anybody else is interested, just send me an email or throw a comment in the chat there.
Great. Yeah, hook me up. I want that.
There's nothing like it. There's nothing
expensive
like it.
Though.
So with that, I think that finishes up the questions. Is there anything else you kind of want to leave the audience with before we close out?
Yeah, first of all, I love teaching and I love the opportunity to talk with people. And today, this was very high level, very kind of easy to digest, conceptualize, just kind of look at photographs and have a nice time. We've been aside from each other, away from each other for the last 5-6 months now. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about something I love so much. Adjective-driven approach to photography is my own way of trying to tell a story. It doesn't mean it's yours, okay? This is just a different way of thinking about how to arrive at a consistent portfolio of photographs taken over a long period of time so that you have some sort of consistent voice or vision behind your images. So it makes it a lot easier to put them together, even if you took photographs from 5 different places of different types of subjects. It just doesn't matter anymore, okay? So this is my approach. And with that being said, I'm working on a book right now to be published. And so this has really helped me arrive at that portfolio. Timeless, remote, hopeful, uplifting, heroic photographs is what I'm all about. And I have this, hopefully, this consistent feel over the last 18 years since I came up with that. It's really helped. It's really helped. And I hope that helps you. So thank you for coming in and listening today.
Absolute pleasure. And with that, I think we will wrap up the webinar. Again, we'll have the contact information for Andy. It's been throughout the presentation, but we'll send it out in an email afterwards. And don't hesitate to contact him or get in contact with us at Digital Transitions. So thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.